And today's first question is for the two of you, and then I'll go ahead and chime in as well. When you first started your practice, what were some of the first things that you did to set up? For example, how did you decide on a business name? How did you pick your practice area or areas? Did you get malpractice insurance? How did you decide whether you were going to get a virtual or a brick and mortar office? And what decisions did you make regarding phones? Harlan, you want to go ahead and kick us off?
Sure. Naming the business is a great question. What I did in my situation was I came up with 3 or 4 different ways I might call my law firm, and then I did a straw poll informally among peers that were not exclusively attorneys. I asked people in many different industries and different walks of life what they thought, and the majority of people told me the one that resonated the best with them was the name I chose for my law firm, Harlan, York & Associates. And I went with my gut, which I think is often the case with a lot of these questions. You've got to go at the end of the day with your instincts.
And Daniel, how about you?
When I first started, this was 10 years ago, and just a caveat, many of the things, and it's something we'll touch upon, many of the things that I did 10 years ago would make almost no sense today because law has changed so much. But when I started, I was Daniel Gershburg, ESQ-PC, and I got that name by taking my name and then adding ESQ and a PC at the end. And it worked, I guess, during that period of time. And I switched it over to Gershburg Law at some point, probably 3 years ago. There was no real impetus over that other than the fact that I didn't like the way Daniel Gershburg ESQ appeared over and over. I wanted to project maybe a bigger sort of firm itself. I don't know if it actually worked or not in any way, but that's kind of the reasoning behind it. Yeah.
I didn't put much thought into it, and I probably should have, but a few pieces of advice that I would think with is when you're starting your practice, is the website domain that you're wanting to get that goes along with your business, is it available? And are there any ethical considerations? For example, probably can't call your name, the motorcycle law firm or some kind of a trade name, right? So, but please look into the ethical issues into your state law, and I do cover this issue in the outline that I have included in your materials, but I chose Rincker Law because I thought it was easy to say and write, and that was sort of my decision there.
Most aggressive bulldoglawyer.com was also a great name that I was thinking of, and then I said, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this.
How did you guys choose your practice areas?
For me, immigration law, I always tell people, was a process of elimination. I kept taking classes in law school and kind of crossing them off my list, saying I can't see doing this for the next several decades. And immigration law seemed interesting to me, and I spoke a foreign language, Spanish in this case. So that was sort of a good entree, and I determined 2 decades ago that this was the right direction for me, and it's just gone from there.
I needed to learn the law. When I first started, I took everything that came in the door for a while because I had to pay the rent and keep the lights on. But then I started doing pro bono in bankruptcy. This was around 2006, 2007, actually, 2007. And I learned bankruptcy, and I would just go to bankruptcy court all the time. And the trustees saw me, and I looked 10 years old, and they said, who's the kid? And I explained to them I was doing these things pro bono. They gave me cases. This is around the financial meltdown, and so I started practicing bankruptcy. During that same period of time, I really liked real estate, and I really saw that in both practice areas, I didn't need a big staff, I didn't need a lot of stuff. I could do everything on my own or with an assistant, and so because I want to stay small and stay lean, I started in those practice areas and really have stayed in them since. Yeah. What about you?
Cool. So I didn't mention this in my intro, but I have a hybrid in my law practice. I do both food and agriculture and also family and matrimonial law. So in other words, I do horses and divorces. And I actually started my law practice wanting to be a food and ag lawyer, which is the reason why I decided to hang my own shingle, because I'm here in New York City. There aren't any law firms around here with this practice area. And so I knew in order for me to do this, I needed to do it on my own. And like you, I practiced door law. I just did whatever I could to pay my rent. I got my first divorce, my second divorce. I got a good mentor, and we'll talk about mentors later on in the program, but that really helped a lot. And I began getting very comfortable with family law. So I didn't go into my law practice thinking in a million years I'd be divorcing people, but sometimes you don't find your practice finds you. So my advice for the listeners here, if you don't know the practice areas on don't be afraid to try things out and see what fits and what you like to do.
And there's a lot of attorneys out there, and it's tough because once you're practicing in a particular area of law, it's tough to sort of segue out, but there's a lot of attorneys I know that go into one. I know a criminal attorney that was doing great criminal law for 20 years, decided he wanted to do First Amendment, and he started taking on more First Amendment cases. So, yes, it's to a certain extent, it's important when you first start up to try and figure out what you want to do. Move around. There's nothing wrong with that. Figure out what you like. I mean, it's a tough enough area as it is to practice, and you might as well actually enjoy what you're doing, so try everything out. No.
The one final point I would say is I always warn people when I answer this question from young attorneys or law students. We have a lot of interns who are law students in my office. General practice, as an older practitioner once told me, is malpractice. So you have to be careful not to try to take on too many different kinds of work. If you open up an office and you decide I'm going to do 7 or 8 different areas of law and you really don't know anything or very little about those areas of law, you could find yourself in a big problem trying to do all those different cases.
Yeah.
That's good advice. So do you guys have virtual or brick and mortar law offices, and what did you do at the infancy of your law practice?
I'm sorry, Dan, if you
No,
want.
please, have at it. We got time. We got time.
This is true. I've always been brick and mortar. However, in terms of the concept of a virtual office, while I've never had one, I recognized, I guess, fairly early on, compared to some of my peers, what the internet really represented. So I created a presence online. While I haven't set up a so-called virtual office, I always had the goal in mind with the web that I wanted people to know as much as possible about our office and about what we do in our practice before actually arriving at our door, or in some cases, if they're far away, and with immigration law, it's a natural, not all your clients are going to come and see you if they're in another country, so they have to feel like they're there already.
Yeah, I've always had brick and mortar. I always wanted to cut the overhead and say, this is so stupid, I could just practice out of my living room, but I have an English bulldog and that wouldn't work. What I would say is there's a lot of people that do virtual law and have they're virtual lawyers and have just an online presence, and that's great because some clients are totally fine with that and it doesn't matter in any way whatsoever. You have to figure out what you think your clients would want and what you're most comfortable with, right? You're going to make sacrifices either way. You're not going to be able to please everyone. It's going to be clients that say, I just looked you up and it's a Starbucks, right? Or something along those lines. And there's going to be other clients that say, you're billing me because you have fancy furniture. So figure out what you like, figure out what's right for you, and go down that path. I don't think there's a yes or no on this. But what about, how'd you set up and,
So when I first started, I had a shoestring budget, and I was living in a studio apartment on the Upper East Side. I had a home office. I didn't even have a virtual law office. I didn't even know what they were. And so yeah, that's how I started my law practice. And I soon realized that saying that I lived on East 90th Street in a very residential neighborhood, put everybody on notice that I was working from home. And I tried to say Suite 2A, and that didn't really work too well. But so about 6 months into my law practice, I did get a virtual law office, and I actually recently wrote an article for Law Firm Suites, which was the company that I got my virtual law office with, just a few blocks away from here. And for a very cheap overhead, I was able to get a nice professional address. I had about 4 hours, hooked into my monthly fee, and was able to have that virtual address. And I did that for 4 years until I eventually got my brick and mortar or big girl office space in Midtown.
But that worked for you, right?
It worked for me, yep.
So that's the thing. I mean, I don't know if you guys would agree, but in terms of starting up, you got to stay lean. The budget has to be really tight. So there's no reason to have this fancy schmancy office with 1,000 law books behind you if you don't have the money for it. If you're going to do it, my 2 cents is if you're going to go and get any kind of office, do an office or go to an office where there's a ton of other attorneys, accountants, whatever it is, other professionals that can send you business and you can actually send them business. That's where the sort of snowball will start, and that's where you'll get, even if it's $100 per diem appearance, doesn't matter. You're establishing a relationship with someone, $100 is going to pay for the phone, you keep going, you keep going, you keep going. So,
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So what about phones? Cell phones, ground lines, what you guys do?
We've always operated principally in my firm with landlines, with a number of extensions. It's just, again, indigenous to the work we do. I'm not afraid to give out my cell number. Many years ago when cell phones were still kind of a new thing, believe it or not, I have been doing this that long, people would say, don't give your cell phone number out. It'll be written on the wall at the county jail and everyone will call it. Years later, you know, people are saying, who doesn't give out their cell to their clients? Again, it's nature of, rather the nature of the business. But that said, my firm, I tell the attorneys, it's up to you. There's 4 other lawyers. We will freely text with certain clients, use our cells, but that was, you know, consciously a choice we needed to make because it goes into responsiveness, and a calling card for us has always been being responsive to our clients.
Snapchat. Just Snapchat mostly.
Nice.
Yeah. No, I mean, cell and office phone, the works, yeah.
Yeah, I've always had a ground line as well, and you know, I'm going to be frank. Sometimes cell phones don't have the best reception,
Right.
and, I've had conversations with other lawyers who only work from their cell phone. You know, sometimes the cell phone just doesn't cut it. Doesn't have the reception that you need. More information from me is in the outline on page 9 on phones if you're interested in reading some more on there.